I've been wrestling with something for the past week. It's been gnawing at me, refusing to let me find peace. I feel this overwhelming need to get it off my chest, like unloading a heavy burden that's been weighing me down. My mind keeps drifting back to 2003, when my wife and I were still students. We met in the dorms, studying at the same institute. It was the kind of love story you see in the movies, familiar and yet so uniquely ours. One of my friends, who was also a classmate, ended up being part of our little world, joining us on walks, attending parties, and even being there during those early, shy kisses we shared during our practical training. It was as though those moments made our feelings official. Soon, we were dating and I fell for her. Hard, like a schoolboy experiencing love for the first time. The happiness felt real, vivid, and it lasted for what seemed like an eternity. Nearly a year and a half. That same friend, my go-to guy, even pulled some strings to get us our own room in the dorm. A little sanctuary just for the two of us. Of course, there were the occasional arguments. Nothing major. At least, that's what I thought back then. But something happened that I couldn't shake. I found a message from her ex-boyfriend on her phone. It read, "I'm ready to forget and forgive everything. Let's give it another shot." That was the first time I felt a knot of unease tighten in my chest. We argued long and hard over it. She promised me it was just an attempt to get back at him for breaking her heart. I chose to believe her because, well, my love for her was all-consuming. Life carried on in its usual rhythm. Weekday lectures at the institute, weekends spent working for a well-known European furniture brand. I started to build a reputation there, not just for myself, but I managed to help her get a job there too, and even roped in a couple of friends. That's when things started to unravel. A few months later, she began an affair with one of her coworkers, a guy named Liam. We were still living in the dorm, but now we were in separate rooms. My heart was shattered, weighed down with betrayal, resentment, and a hollow, aching emptiness. But it was during that dark time that my friends really stepped up. They became my lifeline, pulling me out of that pit of despair. Eventually, she married Liam, and I couldn't stay in this job anymore. The thought of seeing them together was unbearable, and I left, tears blurring my eyes as I left. After they moved to the other side of the city, I graduated in February 2008. As a result, my friend and I rented an apartment on the outskirts of the city and began to put our lives back together, focusing on our careers. There have been many women in my life during this time, but none of them lasted longer than a couple of months. Life seemed to me like a whirlwind full of tense moments and vivid emotions. I got a car. Every summer, we'd head to the seaside with a rowdy group of friends. As for my ex-wife, we barely spoke. To be honest, I almost completely let go of her. At least, that's what I told myself. That is, until those occasional drunken nights when nostalgia hit me hard, and I'd dig through old photos. Funny how life works, though. The hard drive with all our student memories crashed, like fate was nudging me to stop looking back. Fast forward to summer 2012. I was on vacation at the beach with someone new, celebrating my birthday. Out of the blue, my ex called. She wished me a happy birthday, asked how things were going, and even admitted that she'd been foolish and wasn't doing well. We ended up talking for over an hour, catching up. But I wasn't drawn back in. I stayed focused on enjoying my holiday with the person I was with. However, after I returned from that trip, we began to communicate more often, by email and text messages. It was just friendly conversations. We shared our impressions of life. That's when I found out she was divorcing Liam. I tried to be there for her, offering my support as much as I could. In the end, we decided to meet, and I invited her to my house. She agreed, and when I saw her, my heart didn't just stop. It seemed to me that it had stopped altogether. I didn't expect to feel like this after 6 long years of separation. Gradually, we returned to each other's lives, and the second chapter of our relationship began. Is our next trip to the sea. It was with her. Around the same time, I got an interesting new job that involved a lot of traveling around the country. As fate would have it, her office was within walking distance of mine. Sometimes we even met for lunch during breaks, snacking together in a cafe halfway between our jobs. After my roommate moved out, my girlfriend and I started living together. I won't lie. Deep down, there was still a flicker of resentment for everything that had happened between us. She even gave me a pet name, calling me Cracker in an affectionate way. It's hard to say how objective I was about it all, but I kept my feelings buried and never let them show. On the surface, everything seemed to be going smoothly. Life was back on track. I upgraded my car, she had her own, and we commuted to work together. She was searching for a new job, though, since the old one barely paid anything. Luckily, her stepfather stepped in and helped her land something better. The beginning wasn't easy. She cried a lot, overwhelmed by everything. But slowly, things started falling into place. She even decided to pursue a second degree. In early 2014, we bought a one-bedroom apartment together, splitting the mortgage equally. We jumped right into renovations and moved in that same year. In September 2014, we tied the knot with a simple, modest wedding at my mother-in-law's cottage, surrounded by close friends. By summer 2015, our daughter was born. She didn't have any children from her previous marriage, so this was all new territory. Suddenly, it was all about diapers, sleepless nights, and adjusting to a completely new way of living. I was working, but I did my best to help with the baby and around the house as much as I could. In the evenings, I'd unwind with a little drink. My wife went back to work quickly. Our daughter was just 7 or 8 months old at the time. At first, she worked remotely, then started going in part-time, and eventually returned full-time once our daughter was a bit older. During that period, my mother-in-law was a huge help. She lived out at her cottage, about 150 kilometers away, and often took care of our daughter. Sometimes I'd drive them to the cottage, but most of the time, my wife handled it. In 2015 to 16, we saved up enough to buy a 3-bedroom apartment in a nearby new building. Once we got the keys, I threw myself into renovating the place. The outcome, a dream come true. The renovation was perfect. Everything turned out just right. We moved in, and the old 1-bedroom apartment was handed over to my mother-in-law, with the idea that our daughter would inherit it later on. I had moved on to a new job by this point, while my wife stayed in the same position, and started earning quite well. In the mornings, I'd drop our daughter off at kindergarten, and my wife would pick her up in the evenings, often leaving work early to do so. If she couldn't make it, my mother-in-law would step in and look after her until one of us got back from work. Cooking dinner, lunch, or breakfast over the weekends has never been an issue for me. In fact, even my wife admits I'm the better cook between the two of us. We've always tried to split the household chores, especially in recent years. We both upgraded our cars, bought new ones, and on the surface, everything seemed like it was going great. But by February 2019, I started sensing that something was off in our relationship. We were getting into more arguments, often over small things, and the tension between us was building. She started staying late at work, joined a gym, and suddenly began getting manicures and waxing done more regularly. Everything fell into place for me. For several months, we lived in a fog of daily conversations, frank confessions, and pent-up disappointments that had accumulated over the years. There was not enough attention, not enough gentle words, not enough flowers. All this hung in the air. It turned out that Sebastian from her office sympathetically listened to her at just the right moment. The guy is married. He has a child. She swore in every way that there was nothing between them, just conversations in which they both found what was missing in their own families. I gritted my teeth and decided to believe her, putting aside my doubts. After that, I tried not to dwell on it. I have always been faithful to her. These are my core values, although there have been many temptations along the way. In May 2019, we went on a trip to Spain. It was then that I found out that the correspondence with Sebastian was still ongoing. I bit my tongue again. I even talked to him, asking him to quit his job and not destroy our families. He seemed worried that his wife might find out about it and tried to find another job, but without success. So I stayed by my wife's side, and gradually things started to get better again. We became more attentive to each other, communicated more openly, stopped accumulating resentments, and shared household chores. During the 3 months of quarantine, we stayed at my mother-in-law's cottage, living in perfect harmony. We hardly argued at all. Around that time, we also bought a plot of land nearby, planning to build a house. Before the first frost hit, we cleared the land, put up a temporary cabin, and got everything in order. We planned to start full-on construction in the spring and even began discussing having a second child. I really want a son. But for the past month, I've had this nagging feeling I just can't shake. Anxiety, unease, no matter what I do. My wife has been coming home on time. We've been in constant touch through WhatsApp all day, and there hasn't been any obvious reason for distrust. Then I got sick and had to stay home for a week. Coincidentally, my wife took my car to work during that time. On Saturday, we went to the hospital with our daughter, and while my wife took her in for some tests, I waited in the car. Out of curiosity, I ended up looking through the registrar's files. Everything seemed normal at first, but she was chatting on the phone with someone, and something about her tone felt off. My heart started racing. I grabbed a flash drive from the registrar and copied everything onto my computer so I could review it later. On the same day, the hour of reckoning came for me. My wife and daughter went for a walk, but I stayed at home, saying that I had not fully recovered yet. As a result, I eavesdropped on their conversation with Sebastian, who came home from work, for about an hour and a half. I've learned so much about myself, more than I ever wanted to know. Just when I was ready to dive deeper, they came back. I was seething inside. I went to get alcohol and drank it, but I haven't had time to talk to her yet. She already sensed that something was wrong with me. I was furious, almost like a caged animal. When my wife and daughter went to bed, I went into another room and turned on the movie. I watched with headphones, but my mind was racing with everything happening around me. It's hard to even recall those details, let alone talk about them. I realized my life was unraveling. She stood next to me and asked, "So, is it an interesting movie?" I felt like I was going to explode, but somehow I kept it together. When we started talking, she confessed everything right away. This time, it felt all too real. We hadn't spoken for a year, but suddenly, it was like a dam had broken. On top of everything else, I found out that Sebastian has not only a son, but also a wife who is about to give birth. After their first breakup, he thought it would be wise to strengthen family ties. Now I do not know whether to tell her about all this. I'm sure Sebastian's wife wouldn't forgive him. And to be honest, I can't imagine living with this guy because he's such a scumbag. I'm still in shock myself. I haven't filed for divorce yet, but I think my daughter and I will move out of this apartment and move into my mother-in-law's studio, just so as not to upset her. We've decided to live like neighbors, but neither of us wants to go home. Everything inside me feels twisted, like it's boiling over. I'm trying to maintain my dignity, but the anger and resentment are tearing me apart from within.